Smile in my shoes, listen to my blues. I stand before you, resilient, stronger than power, soft as a flower. I know the hour, I am the times. It's the strength for me, it's the strength, it's the legacy.
Hi, I'm Gwen McKinney, creator and campaign director of Unerased Black Women Speak. And we are in a very special moment here live at the Philadelphia Free Library, where we are hosting an event, a film screening of the film Kemba, which is really a feature film that is the journey of Kemba Smith from incarceration to warrior. And I'm so excited because our Amplified show cast this month is really devoted to unerasing incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women, telling their story, lifting them up, and giving them their voice. So we're very proud to present not only the film, but a talk back with Kemba Smith and our colleague Kadida Kenner, who is the CEO of the New Pennsylvania Movement. You'll also hear from other advocates who are working around formerly incarcerated women, the cases of lifting up and ensuring that their rights are realized in the public square, in voting, in housing, in licenses, in getting jobs. We will hear from Sheena Meade, who is the CEO of the Clean Slate Initiative, and she is doing battle to ensure that the rights of formerly incarcerated women and formerly incarcerated people are addressed. So I invite you to join us to hear Kemba's story firsthand, not only the feature film, but the real story that Kemba has lived and her from incarcerated woman to advocacy. So enjoy our show and thanks for tuning in.
Yes, so I am the CEO of the Clean Slate Initiative. We are a national bipartisan organization that focuses on automatically sealing and clearing records for people who are seeking relief, who are seeking a second chance. And we're doing that by automatically clearing records. You know, when I was out there organizing, trying to register people to vote or get people excited about the ability of being able to show up at the ballot box as someone who had a felony conviction, folks would tell me like, yes, voting may be important, but right now I don't have a job. I can't get a job. I can't get housing. I can't even go to school. I'm cut out from all these different occupational licenses. And that just brought to my attention that, you know, yes, voting is very important. It helps change the policies, the political makers who make the decisions. But when you have somebody who's sitting there hungry or they can't be housed, like we have to think about other policies. So when the opportunity came to lead Clean Slate Initiative, I jumped on it because we have to remove barriers for people so they could be able to thrive in society for returning citizens. It wasn't until I got deep in this work and I realized, wait a minute, I have my own story. Because currently in Florida, I still have an arrest and a conviction on my record that is over 20 years old from having a worthless check, but yet it still creates barriers for me when I'm trying to even participate in my child's school. So on the federal level, we have a bill called the Clean Slate Act, and we're asking people to ask your members of Congress and members of the U.S. Senate to co-sponsor and support the Clean Slate Act. It would create the first historic law to be able to petition and automatically get your record cleared. That will impact hundreds of thousands of people who have federal offenses that are eligible. So we're asking folks to join in on that. You know, a lot of organizations, advocates, more voices will help really lift up this policy to the lawmakers.
I remember, and I've watched this maybe two and a half times. And I recall one part in the film when the attorney from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund said, this could have been anybody. This could have been me. And there was an audible gasp here in the crowd because we think about how this could have been any of us at any moment. And so we're just grateful for you willing to share your story and be with us today. Congratulations on being executive producer of the film. Thank you. We love that. That's a big deal. We love that. So I have a few questions for you this evening, and I'm sure the crowd will have some questions too if we get time for that. But I just want to start off by saying, thank you for sharing your story. And as the movie opened with you in that white dress, your debutante ball dress.
Yes.
Tell us about how you go from debutante ball dress through, being in college, enjoying the college experience, going through the process, the legal system, and to where you are today. What is the lesson of all of these years?
I think the lesson overall, and thank you, Kadida, for your dedication and the work you do in Philly community. And even I'm famous for forgetting questions, but I do want to take the liberty too, because even though Gwen McKinney mentioned she lived the story, like even in the scene where my parents, which wasn't made up, actually met President Clinton. I was inside. I didn't know all of what was going on, but I do remember my parents telling me how Gwen basically was prepping them. She was the one that called, I guess, and asked if my dad had a tux. And she, when we started moving through this clemency campaign effort, she worked closely with my parents, with Elaine Jones. So always forever grateful to you, Gwen, for your dedication and work and passion. So thank you. And thank you for being willing through Unerased to host this screening of the film. I really appreciate the support. But going back to your question, I mean, overall, what it taught me is that I was enough. I've always been enough. And I think even with me being a mom now and having my own teenage 14-year-old daughter, God help me, that, I went through certain self-doubts, and I just needed to understand that, I was always enough. And I think through this journey, even though I did, go astray from what my parents had, invested in me with going to Hampton, I'm just, again, always give glory and honor to God, because even though I was a fool, he still had his hand on me, and he was able to turn that bad situation around for good. And when I got on my knees and I prayed and I asked God to allow me to be a voice to prevent someone else from going down the same path. I didn't know how he was going to do it. It took some time for me to realize, oh, this train is really moving. And all I had was faith and hope. I had given birth to my son, and I was just scared that I wasn't even going to be able to raise him. And my parents, were gracious enough to raise them. And trust and believe, my parents are the heroes to the Kemba Smith story. So once again, please give some applause to my parents. And again, even in being executive producer of the project, I couldn't have done any of this if it wasn't for them giving me the okay, because I didn't want to do anything that was going to cause any additional harm, trauma. But they always understood the story, because it's not about me reliving my story over and over again. It's about what God has used us as a family to impact others and impact communities. Now, my dad, when they were advocating for my release and traveling across the country, the movie didn't capture at all how often they stayed on the road with my son. Gwen knows about that too, because she helped plan and prepare some of those opportunities. But my dad always said it didn't matter who was in the room. Whoever was in the room was supposed to be in the room. But I will challenge the Philadelphia community. And Gwen, thank you so much again and I know you're well connected, but I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to come back, because what it is, my hope is to be able to impact women like my sister, Tony, who is in the audience, and thank you so much, Tony, because I know it's so much other things you could have been doing. But she is CEO of Ardella's House, which is a home that helps women that are coming out of prison, provides residential housing and services for them. But I want to be able to come back. I want to be able to come talk to the women. I want to have some young people, high school students, college students in Philadelphia, to be able to share this story with. But I believe that the story is going to do what it needs to do. And, long-winded answer to your question, but I realize that that I'm enough. And even in this role, because, I've done things from since being out of prison. One of the things that I had to learn coming out was that, I don't have the traditional path. I'm out here basically impacting people ever since my release, when there was no criminal justice reform movement, where there weren't as many formerly incarcerated community out here. But it's just been really important for me to continue to share, to hopefully influence a future prosecutor, influence a future cop, influence a future lawyer, which I know that people have come to me and told me that's one of the reasons why they're in the professions that they're in. But it's always been about impact.
Yeah. I want to speak on that a little bit more. One of the powerful moments in that movie for me was the women getting out of the limousine and saying they wanted to show power and they wanted to show that you were not alone. So can you speak a little bit about the impact of the church, of the links, of Deltas, your sorority, and all of the help and assistance that led to you in this position today?
Yeah, so I will say that again, oftentimes we have a loved one that goes through the system and is incarcerated, and you're uncomfortable talking about it in the community. And I know that Elaine Jones, basically, my parents had already made the decision to speak publicly about my situation through doing the Emerge article. But once that happened, and Elaine Jones, again, the power of sisterhood, she read the article and was just like, wait a minute, this happened in my hometown. And where she was from, Norfolk, Virginia. She said she wanted to make sure she did whatever she could do to help bring her homegirl home. And then once she met my parents, and then her being a member of the Links, the Deltas, the National Council of Negro Women, she wanted to bring it to these women's platforms. Now, understand that there weren't too many stories back in the 90s where, Elaine was going to these prominent Black women's organizations, wanting them to support me, someone who did some things, but these women could empathize and see themselves in me. They could see their daughter, they could see their sister. And so it wasn't about, as you heard in the film, them feeling sorry for me. It was about the fastest growing population within prison at the time were Black women. And they had hoped that my case would set a precedent for other women. But it really, in the movie, they really didn't come to my parents' house. They actually came to the prison to see me. And I remember they locked the whole prison down. And it was this correctional officer, white correctional officer, asked me, who are these 3 Black women coming in the white limousine, coming to visit you? In my mind, I was just like, you just don't know. But it was, and Nesta played me so well, but it was surreal at that moment to have those 4 Black women, prominent women, visiting me in the prison. And I felt like something was bound to happen. And so even to share after my release, I'm so very grateful to all of those organizations because they help empower me. Because when I came out, some of those same organizations wanted me to come share and tell my story in various communities. And that helped me, not be ashamed of, what I had gone through. And it also allowed me to heal. And it also allowed me to see how relevant the story still was and is. Oh, wow. My mom, that's how she does.
The question is, why are you at Delta today?
Yeah, explain that, Gwen, because this is why I am a Delta too, is because my mom gave me permission, number one. But the Deltas were there for me through thick and thin, and had a letter writing campaign. They had stuff going across nationally and internationally across the country. So when my friend from Henrico, Virginia, which is the chapter that I crossed over, she invited me to Rush, and I just remember being in tears. Watching the founders video and just being grateful for the founders of that organization. So there was no question about me moving forward.
Yeah. There's an article out today that came out in NPR talking about how young Black girls are over-incarcerated, over-disciplined at a different rate than others. And, that's really impactful in this moment. Here we are in Philadelphia, birthplace of American democracy. We have an upcoming election. Next year, we're going to have elections for our judicial system. And there was a powerful statement that you made in the movie, so we'll have to find out if it's the truth, about a reporter who came out to you when you were getting released and coming out of that Mercedes. And she asked you if you felt like you were a victim of the system. And you said, I'm not a victim of the criminal justice system, I'm a victim of the law system. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so that reporter was me, by the way. And I actually wrote the line that Nesta said about not being a victim. But basically, when I was sentenced, the judge wasn't actually able to look at my individual acts and what I did. He didn't even, I don't think, saw me as human because, like it said in the movie, he was actually, my 86-year-old judge was actually sleeping when the domestic violence expert testimony, where they were talking about the domestic violence and abuse. So it's a system that was created. And for those of you all who may remember Len Bias, basically because of Len Bias, he played for the University of Maryland. He OD'd on the basketball court from crack cocaine. And once that happened, there was hysteria about it, and legislators felt like they needed to do something quick. Typically, there's studies and research that's done before you enact policy and legislation to see what kind of impact it'll have. But unfortunately, there were some of us, people of color, who were also in support of some of this legislation. And so it basically was the legislation that sentenced you 100 times more harsher than if with a crack cocaine case versus a powder cocaine case. So there were policies back then in the 90s. Even though I'm grateful for President Clinton releasing me from federal prison, but just like it said in the intro of the video, basically him signing the crime bill is what increased Black and brown bodies within the prison system. And so there was no room for any type of alternative sentencing. I know today there's some states that have a primary caretaker bill where, if there's a mother who's going through a similar situation in mine in that particular state, they will offer them the opportunity for not to be incarcerated so they can be with their child based on whatever offense. I know in the state of Oklahoma, they have policies where the prosecution will look at whether or not a woman has been involved in a domestic violence relationship, intimate partner violence, if it's involved in their case, and they'll have some reduced sentencing for that. But one of the caveats to that is that there has to be documented evidence such as restraining orders. And oftentimes we know that women half the time don't even file a restraining order. I know I didn't. So that law wouldn't have helped me. But there's certain policies that back then that weren't beneficial to me, that didn't look at me as a whole person, didn't look at the fact that I had just given birth to a child. One of the most inhumane things for me was the fact that after I gave birth to my son, I wasn't able to hold, smell, feel, touch him. For women that are incarcerated in county jails, I think to be one of the richest nations in the country, I don't think that there should be a situation where a nonviolent mother should not be afforded the opportunity to bond, to have that natural maternity instinct that typically happens. And so again, I'm grateful for my parents, because the federal government chose, after I gave birth to him and I went back to county jail and I couldn't hold, touch, feel, smell him, they chose to ship me off to a prison in California, which was over 2,000 miles away from my family. And luckily they were able to come visit me. But women who are incarcerated in the federal system, and men, you're often incarcerated in various different parts of the country that also limits your ability to be able to be included in raising your child.
Now, you've come a long way since being released in 2000,
Yes.
and you've gone on and you've graduated from college. You have a brand new, a daughter, a teenage daughter, and you have your own foundation, and you are an activist for this work. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now today? What are you doing today?
Well, let me just back up to some of the things, because I have this backstory of being in the system. But you're right, as far as coming out, I advocated, I helped with the crack versus powder cocaine disparity and the passing of the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 that President Obama signed. I worked with the NAACP. Ben Jealous was president at the time. He also helped with my freedom because he was the first person to bring my case to President Clinton's attention when he was a Rhodes Scholar. And so I got to travel to Geneva, Switzerland, revolved around voting rights, because even though I had been out of prison, worked a job, paid taxes, I still couldn't vote in the state of Virginia. And so when we had one of our most historic elections, and we're about to have another one, but in 2008, I couldn't vote. And I felt really upset at the policy of the state of Virginia, but I was also still upset with myself because, I wanted to be able to vote. So instead of me whining and crying about it, I made sure that I helped with the get out the vote effort. But eventually I did get my rights restored. And I've just been out here with the advocacy piece. And so in 2019, I decided that I was going to take a job with the ACLU of Virginia, and I started organizing on the ground and building coalition. And then the governor of Virginia, actually the secretary of the Commonwealth of Homeland and Public Safety, Homeland Security and Public Safety, contacted me and offered me this gubernatorial appointment to be on the Virginia Parole Board. And at that point, I couldn't believe that, I would have a vote as far as whether or not someone else would get a second chance, and they put me on the board as a victim. But that's another reason why it was important for me to have this movie, because it's all centered around humanizing people and helping to change the narrative in our country. And especially in this political season, a lot of people try to fearmonger and scare people. And basically, when I was on the parole board, Governor Youngkin said that in his campaign said that we were corrupt, that we were letting out murders and rapists, but we voted some very difficult cases, and most of them were violent cases. And my opinion is that, we pay thousands of dollars in taxes that are supposed to be changing people's behaviors in our correctional system. And once certain boxes have checked off, and if there is state legislation that offers people second chances, then you need to do your job. And so oftentimes it's hard to find a diverse group of people on boards, but you have to do deep dives. And so that whole experience helped me understand that a lot of our young people in our country don't even have a first chance, much less a second chance. So the point of the movie was, again, to humanize stories and to use that as a form of advocacy to get people more engaged about what's going on in our criminal justice system. And so what I'm doing now, I'm full-time on the road with these screenings, because not everybody watches BET Plus. It's now streaming on BET Plus, but I'm also on a couple of boards. I also work with a federal agency, the 400-year African American History Commission, where we've been to over 12 HBCUs and basically conducting research with students about their fear of law enforcement. And then we bring in law enforcement and conduct a training, and they talk about their fear. And because of my role on the parole board, not only do I fight for second chances, but I also understand the fear of certain law enforcement, because trust and believe, I needed to pray, lay myself down on the altar after I read case after case. But the whole idea with that is building trust within our communities, between community and law enforcement. But that's just a snippet of some of the stuff that I'm doing now.
I come to this work that I'm currently in today from a policy shop, and we're big on numbers. And the numbers, we talk about numbers, but not the people. I mean, look at the numbers. The end of the film talked about how there were, since 1980 to 2020, how many folks were locked up, how many women were locked up, 152,000. And between 2020 and 2024, that number has increased by 41,000 more women incarcerated currently in this country. We over-incarcerate. And I'm glad that you got to mention that you were unable to cast a ballot in 2008, able to vote in 2012. And here we are in this audience here in Philadelphia. And this is a reminder here in Pennsylvania, where we are progressive as a Commonwealth, is that you can actually vote the moment your feet hit the street.
Yeah. Oh,
here
wow.
in
Yes.
Pennsylvania. The moment your feet hit the
Yes.
street, you can vote
Good
here in
job, Pennsylvania.
And, we do a lot of voter registration as an organization, New Pennsylvania Project. We do a lot of voter registration, civic education. And there are so many Pennsylvanians, Philadelphians in particular, who have no idea that their rights have been restored because they're misled, disinformation, misinformation, lies
Yep.
To the community, that they are not eligible to vote when they are. And on a daily basis, we're registering somebody who thought they could not be registered to vote.
I was in that category. When I moved to the state of Indiana, I just automatically thought that I couldn't vote. And I called a lawyer and asked, and they basically let me know that even though I couldn't vote in Virginia because of the laws, but when I moved to Indiana, I could vote there. So it is very important for our formerly incarcerated community to know their status.
Absolutely. Another tidbit here, about Pennsylvania and what's happening is we have obviously the upcoming election. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. And next year, we're going to have judicial elections here in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of only 7 states in the entire country. We get to elect all of our judges in partisan elections.
Wow.
How powerful and impactful is that?
Yeah. I want you to, I don't want to cut you off, but one of the things that, and I don't know in this election process, but what I've learned is that hopefully there are town halls that will happen where these candidates will be on stage and you ask them, what decisions have been made in certain cases so that you can get their viewpoint and get them on record. But I guess I have a question for you too, as far as, what's the transparency? Because I know in Virginia, with being on the Virginia Criminal Sentencing Commission, it's just so hard to get that transparency and data. And they're still, they voted to, look at a study to see how much it would cost to implement something like that. But how open has the state of Pennsylvania been with data collection and transparency with sentencing?
We're lucky that here in Philadelphia, there's an organization that does court watching to get a good look at how these judges are making decisions and following along. But it's very difficult to actually find out how judges ruled on certain cases. Or I know myself, I had to actually just Google a judge if I was going to confirm them to stay on for another 10 years. I had to Google them to find out kind of where they stood on issues because it's not really that transparent. And that's what makes it difficult here in Pennsylvania about voting for judges.
Well, the interesting part is just as much as we need that law enforcement accountability and database, judges too, maybe it would have been nice to have a database to know that my 86-year-old judge was sleeping during expert testimony, so there's various things that could be watched in some of the court watches. So it's good to know that that's going on. And I real quickly want to circle back to that statistic of women. There's something called the girlfriend problem. And the ACLU coined it. My friend Deborah, why am I drawing a blank on Deborah Smalls? She was with Open Society. She's also someone who was very instrumental in helping to bring me home, made sure that was the first grant money that the foundation received, but she wasn't included in the movie. But the girlfriend problem basically is where girlfriends get caught up with, drug dealers. And when everything hits the fan, the drug dealers are out here cooperating because they know the ins and outs of the business. They know how much drugs were going here and there, but the girlfriends don't have any information to give, and they wind up getting more time than the actual drug dealers. But you also, another thing that needs to be acknowledged, and I know New Jersey, like I said, Oklahoma, and I feel like there's another state that I'm not thinking of where they're starting to relook at, again, women's cases that have experienced intimate partner violence, because a lot of the women that are incarcerated have experienced trauma that have led them down their path to incarceration. And so I don't know if you want me to start talking about Michelle West, but I want to make sure I mention Michelle. So in the movie, you all saw my friend Michelle West, who gave me this gold necklace because she was, this was a prop that we actually used in the movie, but she was actually the first person to tell me that I was going to be released because she heard my name on CNN. But she is serving a double life sentence plus 50 years and has been in prison for already over 30 years. And so, again, this movie is not just about me. I'm hoping that I can garner people's hearts and attention to want to sign a petition. You can click on the QR code. There's a form on the table where you can take that with you home to learn more about her case. But we hope that President Biden will commute her sentence like President Clinton did mine before her release. She already went through President Obama, President Trump. Her daughter, Mikkel, actually went to the White House. She's a celebrity stylist, and she had hoped that her mom was going to be released that year, but it didn't happen. So we are really praying and acting. And part of the impact campaign that's been launched along with the film has been centered around freeing Michelle West and other women who've been incarcerated and have been exposed to intimate partner violence.
I want to ask you this question because you are an activist and an advocate, and you can never be in a room full of people and not leave without giving a call to action. So wondering what your call to action would be to the audience that's here today and to their 10 friends that they have at home.
My call to action, number one, is I'm not telling you how to vote, but don't sit this one out. Please go vote. I mean, one of the things while I was incarcerated, even though I went to predominantly white schools, went to a HBCU, I still didn't know my history the way that I needed to. And that's why it really irritates me about this critical race theory and wanting to take, education out of the books. If they knew like I knew, you better make sure our young people know about our history and know how resilient we are. Because once I found that out in prison, it made me want to slap myself in the face for some of the decisions I made because I wanted to keep that torch going for our people. It helped me understand how much strength and power I had within me. I'm getting off track, but go vote because there were blood, sweat, and tears that were sacrificed for us to be able to do it. So I know I don't even understand how some of our people can be caught up on certain issues. You're not going to have a candidate that has everything you like, but you're going to sacrifice your vote, the most powerful tool we have and probably the most historic election on this earth, because somebody's saying, basically, you vote for me this one time and that's all you have to do. That's it. So what does that mean? We're not going to go there. But my whole point is to go vote. That's the one call to action. And number two, my whole being on this road up until President Biden transfers administration, I'm trying to let people know as much about Michelle West, and please go out there, scan the QR code, sign the petition to free her. There's a QR code. If you go on representjustice.org too, if you're not able to scan a QR code, it takes you right through a process on your phone where you can send an email letter to your congressional member asking them to support Michelle West, because I had Congressman Scott and I want to see some congressional support for her as well.
Well, I want to thank Gwen. I want to thank Ms. Jovita. I want to thank all the folks from Unerased who are doing incredible work to put this together this evening. It's not easy. And we thank you for traveling and making the drive and being with us this evening to share your truth. The truth was in that movie. In the movie, it said the truth will make us free.
Yes, my dad said that.
Yes.
Yep.
And it's what the love of parents, their praying mother, and all that can do for you. So thank you for everything.
Through storytelling, events, and digital platforms, Unerased Black Women Speaks strives to shine light on the achievements, civic engagement, and advocacy of Black women and the causes they embrace. Our unique Herstory lens honors the bold sacrifices and awe-inspiring triumphs of warrior descendants, daughters of the enslaved, and the future stewards of our rich legacy. Unlock exclusive updates, curated book lists, and join a powerful sisterhood by subscribing to our Power Play newsletter today.
Asked for a lot. The Montgomery teenager had to take a load off on a crowded bus. A white woman was standing, and the bus driver demanded she give up her seat and move to the back of the bus. At the tender age of 15, Claudette, pregnant, unmarried, and determined to strike a blow against Jim Crow, refused to move. She sparked a fire that changed the course of history. She said the hand of Harriet Tubman was pushing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth on the other. she would not be moved. Handcuffed, arrested, and forcibly taken from the bus, that day she brought the revolution to Montgomery and launched one of the most consequential campaigns of the 20th century. 9 months later, Rosa Parks and Dr. King took the Montgomery bus boycott to the national stage. Claudette Austin Colvin started the storm. Her act of resistance, refusing to get up, is a testament to taking a stand.